Mr. Moore, thank you for talking to me. So, on social media, you'll be seeing a lot of banter about what is likely to happen in as far as the alcohol restrictions are concerned. I've seen people talking about how they've observed movement of trucks and they've seen activity around the retailers that sell alcohol. But you are more closer to the situation in as far as the processes of government are concerned. What do you think? What is your expectation?
Thank you very much for having me. Look, I'm not going to speculate on what the president is likely to say. As the alcohol industry, we're hoping that the president will lift the restrictions on the sale of alcohol. You spoke earlier about the impact on our industry. We've lost 23 weeks or 161 days of trade since 26th of March 2020. That has had an impact not just on our industry, but as well as the economy. It shaved 64.8 billion rand off the country's GDP, and we lost 45 billion rand in sales revenue. So it has been a very difficult time for our industry. And those figures I quoted are even excluding the impact of last week's looting. There are jobs at risk. So yeah, we're hoping that government will allow us to trade because, in truth, there's very little support for the alcohol industry. Last week, when the president made the announcement, he spoke about concessions for businesses who have to apply for licenses. But when we contacted the National Liquor Authority, we were informed that those concessions do not apply to the alcohol industry. So the only way out of this is for us to start trading.
So are you at a point where you are saying you should be allowed to start trading because of the hemorrhaging that has happened in as far as the numbers that you just gave me, the cold, hard facts and numbers that you're giving me, even if by government's own reasoning for the alcohol, the restrictions on the sale and transportation of alcohol, even if the situation that led to them taking these measures still prevails?
Well, we've been monitoring the infection rates, and those are starting to show some positive results. They are starting to trend downwards, which is certainly something that we as industry are pleased with. We think that after 16, 18 months into this pandemic, we should have some other tools except a lockdown. We think that for starters, there could be an investment from government in terms of contact tracing. I mean, those are the type of things that have been done around the world quite successfully to reduce the infection rates and to control the spread of the virus. So, we're asking government to ramp up its vaccination program and look at other tools at controlling this pandemic. But like I said, we're very pleased that we've seen a general reduction in infection rates.
The one argument that your sector has never really been able to overcome, even in court, in the various court cases, is when government says, actually, we can show you the figures in terms of admissions in hospital from trauma, where alcohol is an element, be it on the roads or other kinds of trauma that people suffer, violence, etc., etc. That's been difficult for you to overcome, right, by way of argument. So what will you say if government persists and continues to say, actually, we need the hospitals, emergency rooms to be cleared for people coming through who need to be attended to, who need oxygen support, we need to convert some of those to COVID-19 wards. We cannot afford to do this.
Look, we've conducted some research, and yes, government has laid the blame at the door of the alcohol industry. But we've done some independent research, and each time we've had restrictions on alcohol, we've also seen restrictions and a curfew being implemented. And when you look at the hospital, the infection rates and the hospital admissions, they track the curfew much more closely than they track alcohol harm. And we've said to government, let's have a look at this data. Let's sit down and let's try to understand your data, because we have data that's telling us something very different. But we haven't had that opportunity. Government has not shared or taken us into their confidence and shared the data that they rely on for those decisions, even though we've shared what we have with them.
And what about this differentiated approach? There's been an argument for a differentiated approach, certainly in as far as the spread of the virus in the various provinces is concerned, but also this whole differentiated approach between on-site consumption and off-site consumption. Have any of the decisions that have been made recently made any sense to you in that regard, or what would you recommend in as far as taking a differentiated approach in as far as these matters is concerned?
Yeah, look, we haven't been able to understand government's thinking in terms of drawing or allowing differences between on-trade and off-trade. We certainly think that that we are at a space now. If you talk on-trade, the restaurants have done some great work just in keeping their patrons safe. But again, Ulysses, it speaks to a proper engagement, and we haven't had that yet. Yesterday we sat with, and the Restaurant Association was in the room while we're having engagements with government, and they've come up with some really good suggestions. Instead of having a curfew that says everybody, both staff and patrons, need to be out by a certain time, which reduces the availability or the time they have available for serving dinner. Rather give the staff permits or concessions that they can clean up after the patrons have left and go home. Now, those type of solutions don't come up unless there's engagement between government and industry. And we've sat and we've said, if there are any concerns, if you engage with us, we'll try and find ways around it. Throughout this pandemic, we've had, we've had people in communities, those community patrollers who've been helping the local and the police forums, helping them to try and deal with people who are not complying with the regulations. So we've done what we can, and we're saying if government shares with us what are the real issues and the data on which they rely on, we can try and find creative ways. We've got to find a different way to dealing with this pandemic by having national bans. Those things are destroying the economy and they're destroying jobs.
Mr. Moore, just lastly, I must tell you that I'm a bit of a skeptic to the narrative that your sector puts out around the thriving illicit trade in alcohol. And I suppose it's because I'm not exposed to the data the way you are. Would you try and win me over and convince me that this is real? This is a real situation, that this is happening at significant levels. I can certainly take in the events of the last 2 weeks where, retailers and wholesalers of alcohol were among those businesses that were targeted. That I can fully grasp. But in general, across the country, outside of that situation in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, help me understand, is that really happening at the level of significance that your industry suggests?
Absolutely. Okay, and let's forget about the looting incidents that you speak of. And if you don't want to believe me, SARS has asked a few foreign diplomats to please leave the country. And they were talking about a handful of foreign diplomats who were causing losses to the fiscus of 100 million rand a month. Now, that quickly adds up. We're saying the number is 20 billion. We say that it's about 22% of the market. And we've heard throughout the ban, and we've had discussions with consumers that said last year and still now during the ban, they've seen brands out there in the market that they've never seen before. So those are things that these are independent of industry research that suggests that this is a huge problem. We have what we call in the industry round tripping. So because our ports are used for most of Southern Africa, we have products come in from overseas with the objective, well, at least the paperwork says it's going to go to another country outside of SACU, the Southern African Customs Union, so they don't have to pay excise because it's not intended for the local market. But these products never leave the market. And yeah, that figure of 20 billion, it'll take me more than a short interview to try and help you understand those things. But there are some independent sources that are saying this is a huge problem.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Moore. I must say the arguments you put up and the evidence you put up is weighty, and I do understand, especially the point you make about round tripping. I guess it comes back to that whole situation around organized crime. It seems to me to suggest similar patterns to what the tobacco industry experiences as well. Kurt Moore from the South African Liquor Brand Owners Association joining us there and weighing in on their expectations for this evening's address by President Cyril Ramaphosa.